to prove Neil was at the crime scene.
We completely went around the entire farm and identified probably close to 100 weeds and plants, but never did we find one Galium aperine.
But why were there no seeds at the Neils' property?
Galium aperine is a plant that is very sensitive to moisture. It takes a very moist climate with rich soil and shaded area for it to grow in.
The previous months had been unseasonably dry in Ohio.
So it was not an ideal year for Galium aperine to be growing.
The plant wouldn't be able to thrive without an additional water source and sufficient shade, which existed at the cemetery.
It was the perfect place. There was water nearby, a creek, so I knew pretty much that that's exactly where the seed would come from.
It was a critical discovery with profound implications for the prosecution.
The presence of the seeds on the blanket indicate that that blanket was used to transport those kids to the site where they were dumped, and it gave us the direct link to those children's bodies.
The prosecution then tried to find out more about Neil's whereabouts on the day the children disappeared.
Sue left the home at around 6:30 that morning, so we know that the children were alive at that point.
It was hard to account for Neil's movements for the rest of the morning.
Kevin Neil called the 911 dispatcher at 1:52 p.m. So there was a period of several hours in which Kevin Neil had time to not only kill the children, but dispose of them and methodically eliminate any evidence that he may have been responsible for.
The prosecution believed Neil had moved the bodies in his distinctive car.
Farmhands who, unbeknownst to Kevin Neil, had been at that residence during the time that he claimed the children had disappeared, noted that there was no maroon Bonneville out on the property.
Neil and his wife Sue had told police the car was unroadworthy.
When investigators took that maroon Bonneville to a certified mechanic for inspection, they discovered a pair of pliers had been applied to the brake line of the rear braking system. The braking system actually was working and was operable, much to the complete surprise of Sue Neil.
Police believed they'd caught Neil out.
The maroon Bonneville was one more piece of the puzzle that ultimately proved Kevin Neil's guilt.
The prosecution were confident they had an infallible case against Neil. 2 years after India and Cody were first reported missing, Kevin Neil was officially charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder and tampering with evidence.
I felt we had conducted a very thorough and complete investigation, and we felt confident that we had identified the person responsible for murdering those 2 children.
The prosecution had pieced together what they believed had happened to India and Cody on that July afternoon.
Kevin Neil and Sue had been arguing over purported infidelities.
Sue left the home.
He took out his anger on the children and killed them.
I believe they were suffocated. They were wrapped up in a blanket.
Kevin drove them to Nettle Creek Cemetery, dumped them into the cemetery.
The blanket picked up a couple of those seeds.
He put them there for purpose of hurting Sue.
He headed back to the home because he had to get all of this done, call the police before Sue got home.
The prosecution were confident that scientific evidence proved their theory.
All of the findings seemed to support the fact that the children died at the time of their disappearance.
The final conclusions that I reached when all of these different specimens were taken in consideration was an interval between the 9th and the 14th of July for most likely time when they died.
Galium aperine would only have grown at the creek and would not have grown at the property, connecting Kevin Neil to the murder of these 2 kids.
The prosecution was certain they had found the killer.
Kevin Neil was the one who had the motive. Kevin Neil was the one who had the opportunity. Kevin Neil had the background to be able to do something like this. It's without a doubt that Kevin Neal killed those kids.
But was there another side to this story? The defense believed there was.
They fixed their focus far too fast, that they began to whittle their square peg to fit their round hole.
They were confident their experts would prove the children were murdered after Kevin Neal had been jailed.
The individuals could have been dead as late as the 1st of August.
Could the defense undermine the prosecution's case?
If a person had been dead 2 months and they hadn't been smelled before, I would be surprised at that.
Prosecuting attorney Nick Salvaggio and the Champaign County Sheriff's Office had officially charged Kevin Neal with the murder of his 2 stepchildren, India Smith and Cody Smith McGraw.
We are absolutely 100% sure that Kevin killed those kids and dumped their bodies at Nettle Creek Cemetery.
The prosecution were confident that scientific evidence proved Neal's guilt.
This case was a combination of using Kevin Neal's own words as well as the forensic sciences to convict him.
But defending attorneys Greg Myers and Diane Menashe thought there were fundamental flaws in the prosecution's case.
This was a case built fundamentally on circumstantial evidence. They fixed their focus far too fast, that they began to whittle their square peg to fit their round hole.
Could the same forensic evidence prove Neal's innocence?
You knew right from jump that we were going to be dealing with a lot of science that is not typical for criminal cases.
They began with the seeds, which the prosecution had focused on.
The seeds would only have grown at the creek and would not have grown at the property, connecting Kevin Neal to the murder of these 2 kids.
When the defense researched the seeds, they asserted the prosecution had arrived at the wrong conclusion.
Those seeds were indigenous to that area of Ohio.
The defense maintained the seeds could be found elsewhere.
These children lived in farm country. They played in farm country. When and how the seeds were put on the bedspread, who knows? Who knows?
Mayers argued the prosecution's theory wasn't conclusive evidence.
We perceived their botany evidence as highly suspect and highly questionable. It seemed to just truly be a pile of smoke.
The defense also dismissed the prosecution's motive theory.
Kevin Neal wanted to hurt Sue Neal, and the way he knew how to hurt her was to hurt someone that she loved, and those were the children.
The state's motive theory here seemed to have stretched the rubber band well beyond the breaking point. By everybody's account, that he had an excellent relationship with his 2 stepkids. They sincerely liked him. He sincerely liked them. No trouble.
The defense contested the view that Neal's comment proved he was a murderer.
To say the stepfather, who by all measure loved those children, enjoyed being with them, to kill them, to cause the mother pain, it seemed so fantastical of a reason to kill children.
The state's theory really didn't make any sense. And it certainly wasn't that strong enough to motivate a double killing of 2 children.
Confident they discredited the state's motive, the defense moved its focus to what they believed the prosecution's case rested on: the time of death.
Determining when the